This video is a collection of short chapter-like essays where I analyze all the major characters of Ouran High School Host Club. The essays are time-stamped, and they can be watched in any order, so feel free to skip around to the characters that interest you. There is, however, a more general idea that emerges from all the essays taken together, which concerns the purpose of the Ouran Host Club as Tamaki designed it. Tamaki sometimes likes to think of the host club as a trivial indulgence, wherein wealthy young boys with too much time on their hands entertain wealthy young ladies who also have too much time on their hands. And that is definitely true of the host club to a certain extent, but it also serves a much more serious purpose for the hosts themselves. Tamaki designed the Ouran Host Club as a second family for outcasts who cannot fulfill their unconventional personalities at home or in school. The host club is a place where these outcasts can all find happiness together. All of the little essays in this video add depth to that idea. I analyze the unconventional personalities of all the wonderful members of the host club, and I explain how Tamaki designed the host club around them and for them. I hope you enjoy the video, and I'd really love it if you'd comment your favorite characters or subscribe to this channel, because it really helps out with the algorithm. There's this funny little storyline in episode 1 of Ouran High School Host Club, where all of the boys in the host club wrongly assume that Haruhi is also a boy when they first meet her. There's a joke behind this misconception, which is that Haruhi dresses so poorly and looks so shabby that she couldn't possibly be a girl, because that would be inconsistent with the other boys' ideas about gender. But then over the course of the episode, each of the boys has their own little moment when they realize that Haruhi is in fact a girl. They'll have some interaction with her that tips them off, and then whenever this happens, the show will present us with a visual metaphor to represent the way that something has clicked inside of them. An unlit light bulb will appear on the screen, and it will turn on, which signals that the truth has been revealed. The most interesting light bulb in this plotline belongs to Tamaki, who is the president of the host club. Tamaki walks in on Haruhi while she's in a dressing room, thinking of course that she's a boy. But once he steps inside, he realizes that he's made a terrible mistake. He suddenly goes silent with shock, and then we see his light bulb turn on. The truth at last has become clear to him. And then Tamaki begins to behave very nervously. He loses his composure, in a way that strongly implies that he has fallen in love. But if you've been watching the episode closely, it's pretty clear that Tamaki's feelings for Haruhi didn't actually begin in the moment when he realized that she was a girl. He had already begun to swoon and blush over her natural charm and nobility way back when she was still a boy to him. But he told himself that he was blushing out of professional admiration, on the grounds that Haruhi has such a natural talent as a host. But another character in the show is able to tell that Tamaki's fascination with Haruhi extends beyond mere professional admiration. To be more precise, there's this regular customer at the host club who is in love with Tamaki, but she becomes jealous when Tamaki starts giving too much attention and affection to Haruhi. She pretty clearly thinks of Haruhi as her romantic rival, even though Haruhi is still supposed to be a boy at this point in the story. I think that this is one of a few narrative signals that Tamaki loves Haruhi in a way that transcends gender. But Tamaki's personality is also affected by a social norm of compulsive heterosexuality, so he wasn't able to describe his feelings about Haruhi as love until she occupied the correct social category, so to speak. But then in the moment when Haruhi became a girl to him, it's like a light inside his head suddenly turned on, and all of his so-called professional admiration was instantly transformed into love. Kaoru has a theory about why Tamaki describes himself as Haruhi's daddy in Ouran High School Host Club. This isn't just a single isolated quirk in Tamaki's behavior. He thinks of the entire host club as a single family unit. Kyoya is the mother, the twins are sons, Haruhi is his daughter, and so on. Kaoru speculates that Tamaki has turned the host club into a literal family as a way of keeping the peace between them, because Haruhi has introduced a profound degree of instability into the organization. Tamaki is in love with her, Hikaru is in love with her, and meanwhile Haruhi's own feelings are a mystery to the boys and perhaps also herself. The host club has become like a house of cards that could crumble if Tamaki or Hikaru explore their feelings too deeply. And so, according to Kaoru's theory, Tamaki keeps the growing pressure under control by sublimating their romantic longings into familial bonds. Tamaki and Hikaru can both love Haruhi in a way that keeps the peace of the host club, so long as they love her as a daughter or a sister, and refrain from asking too many questions of themselves about the reason why they hold her so close to their heart. After all, it's perfectly natural for members of a family to be closer with one another than any ordinary species of friend. But in episode 23, Kaoru realizes that his theory of Tamaki's imagined family isn't exactly right, because it vastly overestimates Tamaki's capacity to manage or even understand his own emotions. Tamaki had always thought of the host club as his family, and he was already describing Haruhi as his son on the very first day of their acquaintance, back when he still thought that she was a strangely adorable boy. He wasn't trying to keep the peace with Hikaru or anyone else when he first decided to become Haruhi's father. It was really just a symbol that he accepted her in the club. But this symbol did nevertheless blind Tamaki to the fact that he would go on to fall in love with Haruhi. He knew that he was jealous when she captured the attention of other boys. He knew that he longed to be alone with her, to entertain and comfort and empower her. But he interpreted all of these emotions through the lens of his imagined paternity. He simply thought it was natural for a father to feel these ways about his daughter. I think it's pretty clear that Tamaki was afraid of the way that he was actually in love with Haruhi, but his reasons for suppressing that love had nothing to do with his potential rivalry with Hikaru. Tamaki struggles to accept the idea that he is capable of receiving the same kind of love that he gives. And this is really built into his persona as a host. He is a man who immaculately charms his clients, but who also goes home alone at the end of the day. Tamaki is the illegitimate heir of a powerful family that resents his very existence because of the culturally shameful circumstances of his birth in France. And as a result, though he may certainly live in the lap of luxury, he also lives under the constant threat of being cast aside, or worse, if he should fail to please his superiors or his grandmother most of all. Tamaki therefore depends on his capacity to flatter and to deny his own emotions in order to atone for his illegitimate existence. This has given his personality an odd mix of outward confidence and inner insecurity. He's an excellent host because he plays on the hearts of his clients so skillfully, and yet he also keeps his own heart locked away because the circumstances of his birth deprive him of the right to legitimate love, of the sort that you'd find outside the abandoned music room that the host club calls its home. And I see that as the ultimate reason why Tamaki continued to think of himself as Haruhi's father long after his feelings had transformed into a deeper kind of love. It was another mechanism for locking his own heart away, because he could not even so much as register the possibility that a person as noble and radiant as Haruhi could feel anything for him outside of the seedy boundaries of the host club. Honey's personality in the Ouran host club initially seems like it's been structured around a joke. He outwardly looks like a tiny adorable boy who loves cake and stuffed animals and is generally regarded as the baby of the group. But Honey's adorable exterior also conceals a secret, which is that he is a terrifying prodigy of the martial arts, the likes of which hasn't been seen in Japan for hundreds of years. But Honey generally keeps that side of himself locked away, because he far prefers the pleasures of cake and stuffed animals, or daily uppies with his best friend Mori. Yet there's also a funny way in which Honey's laid-back life of adorable self-indulgence represents a path of greater strength for Honey than anything he could achieve through the pursuit of martial arts. He only acquired the courage to embrace such a life very recently, after Tamaki first invited him to join the Ouran host club. Honey is the eldest son of the great Haninozuka family, which has managed the Haninozuka School of Martial Arts for centuries. That was how Honey first discovered his talent as a warrior. He was being groomed as his father's successor to be the next head of the Haninozuka School. But Honey also struggled to find acceptance from his father, despite the fact that he was such a monster in the dojo, because his personality and lifestyle failed to conform to conventional ideals of a warrior's masculinity. Honey was simply too small and cute. He loved candy and dolls a little bit too much. And so his father urged him to deny his attachment to childlike feminine things in order to save the reputation of the Haninozuka school. And for a long time, Honey really did try to deny his inner need to live like an adorable baby. He chased after the image of warrior strength that his father demanded of him by suppressing his personality. But before Honey could walk too far down this unhappy path, he would fatefully encounter Tamaki for the first time, and Tamaki would invite Honey to consider a different philosophy of strength. Perhaps the strongest warrior is not the one who denies his own truth in order to please his father. Perhaps it is instead the one who defies his father in order to fulfill the instincts of his personality. Perhaps the strongest Honey of all is the one who feasts on alarming quantities of cake at all hours of the day, and who freely indulges in daily uppies on Mori's shoulders with his stuffed rabbit in hand. That was the life that Honey actually wanted to lead. But he did not have the strength to do it because he did not have a home or family who would embrace that part of himself. But that was also the exact reason why Tamaki wanted to create the Ouran host club. He wanted it to be a second family, where people like Honey were invited to discover their true strength, and thus become the truest version of themselves that would not otherwise have a place to call its home. The host club would be a space where Honey's strength would be rewarded, because it would attract the type of people who delight in the ways that he's unmanly, and they would love him for it. I like to think of Honey as an archetypal member of the Ouran Host Club because he represents such a clear expression of its purpose as Tamaki envisioned it. Tamaki created the Host Club to provide a sense of social belonging, where boys and girls at Ouran Academy can cultivate and delight in their own unconventional personalities without the stifling fear of prejudice or ostracism. Mori had originally joined the Ouran Host Club purely because Honey had chosen to participate in it, for Mori had devoted his life to Honey as his loyal servant. But I also think that Mori ended up discovering his own form of personal fulfillment within the club, and this was largely because of the fact that it served as a vehicle for Honey's happiness. Mori doesn't really like to talk about his feelings, so it can be hard to pin down what exactly inspires his devotion to Honey. We know that part of it stems from the fact that the two of them are cousins, and their families have a long history of companionship. But I also think that there's more to Mori's affection than mere family tradition. Mori reveals a precious clue about the workings of his heart way back in episode 1, and strangely enough, it happens during an interaction with Haruhi, in the very moment when he discovers that she's a girl. There's a scene shortly after Haruhi receives her first makeover, and the club dresses her up to look like a proper host. Haruhi looks and behaves like such an adorable boy that Tamaki is stricken with an episode of cuteness aggression, and he wraps her up in a suffocating embrace. Haruhi then calls out to Mori to free her from Tamaki's clutches. But when her words reach his ears, Mori is overcome by a powerful wave of emotion. His eyes open wide with instinctual resolve, and he races to Haruhi's aid. But then just as he frees her, a spell suddenly falls over him, for he too has become entranced by Haruhi's boyish cuteness. He finds himself hoisting her in the air like a baby, and he blushes as a few seconds of silence fall over them. That awkward blushing silence was actually the precise moment when Mori realized that Haruhi was in fact a girl. He could tell by the way that she felt in his arms. But it's important to keep in mind that he still believed that she was a strangely adorable boy when he instinctually raced to her aid and raised her up in the air like a little baby. Because as far as I'm concerned, that instinct is likewise the kernel of his connection to Honey. Mori is drawn to Honey out of a broader chivalrous instinct to protect adorable little babies. That impulse is the defining feature of his personality, and though it has attached itself to Honey, Haruhi momentarily diverted that instinct when she called out to Mori under the guise of a helpless boyish host. I think that Mori's chivalrous affinity to cuteness is the essential ingredient to his happiness within the Ouran Host Club. Mori satisfies that affinity by attaching himself to Honey. You can think of that as the psychological origin of their companionship. But Honey himself also requires the Host Club in order to unleash the full potential of his cuteness. For Honey's family wanted to take away his right to behave like a little baby. They wanted him to be strong and fearsome like a warrior because Honey had been born into a family of martial artists. But when Honey would deny his inner instincts for cuteness, it also had the unhappy side effect of denying Mori of his instincts as a silent guardian of cuteness. Mori simply could not be true to himself unless Honey was also true to himself, because Mori's truth was always to love the baby inside of Honey. And so it was that both of them equally needed the Ouran Host Club to summon their truth into reality, for Tamaki had designed the Host Club precisely as a space where people like them could be free. One of the lessons that Haruhi learns from her friends in the Ouran Host Club concerns the importance of personal beauty. Haruhi is pretty indifferent about her appearance when we first meet her because she believes that the inner self is the only thing that matters, and so she doesn't put any effort into her personal style. But I think that this indifference is also tied to something a little bit sad about her character, which is that she doesn't really have friends, and perhaps more importantly, her friendlessness is self-imposed. Haruhi is extremely charismatic and charming, but she also deflects social recognition. She has a way of making herself small and invisible, and her shabby appearance in the first episode is an expression of this tendency. I think that Haruhi's self-imposed invisibility originates in her home life. She lives under a single-parent household, and she views herself as a burden to her struggling father. And in response to this circumstance, Haruhi has organized her life around the goal of not needing other people, because that way her father might not have to worry about her and her existence would become less burdensome. But she also takes this goal a little bit too far, to the point where it sometimes looks like she wants to disappear from other people's lives entirely, because Haruhi's own emotions and needs just aren't worth the trouble. If you keep all of this context about Haruhi's character in mind, I think it becomes really easy to see why the Ouran Host Club was so important for her development. The Host Club is all about appearances and ego, and so when the boys gave Haruhi her first makeover as a host, what they really offered her was the stage of visibility. They gave her the job of becoming large rather than small. When you contrast Haruhi's personality with a person like Tamaki, it can initially seem like Tamaki is self-obsessed and unserious because of the way that he requires so much adoration. But then when Tamaki invites Haruhi to partake in some of this self-indulgence for herself, the effect is more therapeutic than anything else, because of the way that it dampens Haruhi's instinct for self-denial. Kyoya used to pride himself on the way that no one around him could read his true intentions or character. He would conceal his cunning and egoistic personality behind a facade of politeness and servility. This talent for self-camouflage was a natural consequence of Kyoya's role as the youngest son of a powerful family. Kyoya's core responsibility within this family was to strategically ingratiate himself with other nepo babies at his wealthy private school. His ultimate objective was to win over other powerful families as allies to his father by forging bonds of friendship with their children. But in order to achieve that objective, Kyoya had to hide the contempt that he felt for most people, for he regarded his peers at school as simpletons. And so in order to win their affection, he would plaster a simpleton smile on his own face and pretend to be just like them. But there was also another reason why Kyoya was so adept at concealing his personality, and this one hit a little bit closer to home. Kyoya had two older brothers who were destined to inherit the family business purely in virtue of their seniority, despite the fact that Kyoya was their superior in all things, from business to academics to politics. And this circumstance forced Kyoya to place limits on his own achievements in life, because he feared that it would disturb the family peace if it looked like he was overshadowing his older brothers. Kyoya's father certainly expected him to be excellent, but if Kyoya shined too brightly, it may seem as though he's acting above his station, or sending a message to his brothers that he is their superior. And in the hierarchical world of family aristocracy, that is a very dangerous game to play. And so Kyoya always forced himself to dampen his own ambitions. But as a result, his entire life would then become something of a lie, a self-imposed prison of servile mediocrity relative to his own infinite potential. I think that these details about Kyoya's life are pretty important as context if we want to understand why Kyoya accepted Tamaki's proposal to found the Ouran Host Club. Haruhi once told Kyoya that his participation in the club had always surprised her, because a high school host club is such a crazy idea, whereas Kyoya is always so practical and level-headed. But Kyoya explained to Haruhi that it was precisely the craziness of the enterprise that attracted him in the first place. Kyoya's level-headed practicality was never some kind of innate quality that he particularly valued. It was the result of his undesirable position within the family hierarchy as the youngest son who must be excellent yet also inconspicuous, and who always draws within the lines established by his older brothers. There's a part of Kyoya which craves craziness as a way of breaking out of those constraints, but he struggles to access that part of himself on his own, because in many ways those constraints are self-imposed by a sincere desire to please his family. But Tamaki has a unique power whereby he makes Kyoya feel a little bit crazy. And moreover, Tamaki's ideas are also crazy. And so, as Kyoya would later explain to Haruhi, it's really no surprise that Kyoya would join Tamaki's host club, because its craziness is his freedom. It exists so far outside the boundaries of what his family deems respectable or desirable that Kyoya feels free to express the full potentials of his personality without ever looking back over his shoulder for his family's approval. Hikaru and Kaoru are the twins of Ouran High School Host Club who seem to love each other a little bit too much. They've created a sort of private world for themselves that purposefully excludes everybody else in their lives in orbit. But their exclusionary intimacy, which they have maintained for many years, really originates as a defense mechanism, as a way of protecting themselves from their own emotions and desires. As a matter of fact, there's really nothing more that Hikaru and Kaoru want deep down than to be loved by other people. But the problem with that desire is that no one else can really tell them apart from one another, and this has a way of erasing each of the twins' identities. They're essentially interchangeable in the eyes of other people, and for precisely that reason, they also feel like they're disposable. If a girl who loves Kaoru receives Hikaru instead, it's all the same to her. But then if that's the case, then Kaoru was never even the person that she really knew and loved. He doesn't even exist as far as she's concerned, and neither, for that matter, does Hikaru. The cruel irony of this situation is that the twins could only feel like themselves whenever they were alone together. That was the reason why the two of them created their little private world that excluded everyone else. They were able to preserve their separate identities through shared solitude, and they lashed out against anyone who dared to penetrate their world, out of a fear that their fragile sense of selfhood might otherwise shatter. But once you understand this overall dynamic, it can start to look like a mystery that the twins would have ever joined the Ouran Host Club in the first place. They sort of resented Tamaki when he initially approached them with an invitation, because in some ways Tamaki was just like everybody else. He couldn't tell them apart, and so he rubbed their faces into the pain of non-existence that they try so hard to forget. But there was nevertheless one thing that made Tamaki different from all the other intruders who break into their private world. It was the fact that he sought to understand the pain that caused the twins to create that world. He didn't feel threatened when they lashed out at him for the sin of shattering their individuality. Instead, his response was to devise a solution for their pain, and he presented the host club as the vehicle for that solution. Tamaki saw that the twins were stuck inside of a contradiction. They wanted to connect with other people, but they were also afraid of getting hurt whenever someone tried to get too close. And so Tamaki proposed a compromise. What if the twins joined the host club precisely to hold other people at a safe distance, to make sure that no one around them gets too close? What if the twins assumed an inauthentic persona at the club? They could magnify the caricature of being too close to one another to the point of being indistinguishable, and then they could turn it into a piece of theater for the purposes of entertainment. That way the host club would become more like exposure therapy. The twins would be living out their greatest fear every day of losing their separate identities. But this way they'd be playing it up for laughs, and so they wouldn't have to worry about being disappointed when people continually confuse them. They can work through their instinct for isolation in a playful setting that has no stakes. But as Tamaki also explained, this exposure therapy would likewise have the power to bring the twins closer to their ultimate goal. What the twins really wanted was to discover a person who could tell them apart, and to make that person their friend. And perhaps, if they get lucky, that person might stumble along amongst the crowds who pass through the Ouran Host Club. They won't be looking for her, and they won't be expecting her, but they will be practicing their power to break out of their bubble and exist among other people, because that way they might at least be ready for her when she finally comes along.